to get to yes in your marriage-based green card process. I'm U.S. Immigration Attorney Sharifa Tharpe. I help clients to get their green card status in the United States. I also come on here to give you great information that empowers you through your immigration journey. So don't forget to like, subscribe, so you can continue getting great information like this. So how to get to yes in your marriage-based green card process. I'm going to tell you the important aspects of applying during the marriage-based green card process. Now, the first thing you should know is applying for permanent residence through a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident is not as simple as just filling out some paperwork and attaching a marriage certificate. That's what gets people into trouble, and I want to keep you out of trouble. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the important stages of this process and important pieces of evidence that you have to show to get to yes in your green card process. Now, let's talk about first your relationship. Let's start with that. That's the most important, because there's no such thing as a business marriage in immigration, right? When I talk about immigration, business marriage, if you're in a situation where you're trying to have someone help you out, a friend to help you out, or you're paying someone to marry you in order to get an immigration benefit, that's a no-no. That's illegal. It will not work. And so that's the first thing. There's no such thing as submitting or arranging a marriage and then submitting a marriage certificate just to get the immigration benefit. Your marriage has to be bona fide. It has to be real. You have to have a reason, an intent. You have to have an intent to spend your life, build a life with this U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident. It's not going to be a situation where you're only getting married just for permanent residents. And that's going to be the case even if, say, you're a boyfriend and girlfriend, but you really don't have any intention to live your lives together. That's not considered a bona fide marriage either. Remember that a bona fide marriage is one where you intend to spend your life with the individual. So if you are doing a business marriage, I'm going to tell you right now, this is not for you. You should stop right there and you should not go forward with that. Now, let's talk about the relationship you're having. Now, usually when you're in a bona fide marriage, it doesn't necessarily, it's not required for you to have a long-term relationship. But what's important is what's behind your relationship. Do you have a genuine love for each other? Do you have a genuine goal of being together, of building your life together? You're going to have to show that using evidence. So for example, in cases where, say, you've had a whirlwind romance, I have seen these, where maybe you visited the United States and you met this person at a party, or you met them through a friend, and you had a fast romance turned into something serious. You fell in love, and the two of you decided that you didn't want to be apart. You wanted to spend your lives together, and you quickly got married in Vegas. It's not to say that you won't qualify. You're still not exempted from showing that you are a bona fide couple. And I'll be honest here, it's going to be a little more difficult to prove that when you've had a fast and quick romance and you still want to move forward with your marriage-based process. But here's the solution. If you're in a situation like this, then when you do decide you don't want to be apart and you want to get married and move on and get permanent residence here, you should just start to make sure that you document your marriage, that you show that you have the evidence to back up your intentions. So for instance, if you got married in Vegas and your spouse is here, get legal advice first. So I'm always available to talk through your situation and advise you and represent you through the process. That's the first thing. Don't do anything without first getting legal advice. But when you're together here in the United States, if your spouse, now your new spouse, decides you don't want to be apart, you can possibly explore the adjustment of status process. The adjustment of status, whether you qualify, is going to depend on a number of circumstances here. I'll touch on that in a little bit. But another thing that you're going to want to start to gather is, for example, if you get married in Vegas and now you're moving in with your spouse needs to be added to your lease. That's the first step. And if you are taking your marriage seriously, you're going to add your spouse to your lease so that they can have all the rights as you have as a tenant in that household. And then you're going to possibly think about how you're going to divide your financial resources. How are you going to allocate your financial resources? How are you going to pay bills? And then you're going to introduce your new spouse to your friends and family. On both of you are. You're going to introduce as a spouse, as the U.S. citizen, you're going to introduce your new spouse to your friends, your family. And then your immigrant spouse is going to introduce you, whether it's by phone or video, to their relatives, whether their relatives are here in the U.S. or in the other country. Those are good. That's a good start to setting life off together and also to documenting your intention in your marriage. But as you progress and as you develop and evolve in your marriage, the next thing you're probably going to want to look at is your benefits. So it's just usually a natural transition that your spouse is going to be added to your health insurance, or you're going to find another way for your spouse to be covered by health insurance. So these are the types of things that can show that there is that intention to build a life together. And so once you're newly married, don't push that to the side. This is a very important aspect of the immigration process. So at this point, it's not just fun and games, and it's not just about being in love, but it's also about putting some action into establishing a life together, especially if you want to make sure that you can document this for your immigration process. Now, once for example, for my clients, that's what I get a feel for. What evidence do you have? What kind of lifestyle are you living? If you're together, that kind of evidence will be important. But what if your spouse, you got married? What if you're the U.S. citizen or the legal permanent resident and you went to another country? For example, you may have gone to Jamaica. You may have met your spouse in Jamaica. It was a fast and quick romance. And then maybe after one or two more visits, maybe after the first visit, you decided, this is it. I'm going to get married and we're going to build our lives together. In that case, you can also work on showing evidence, even though you may not live together. Because what happens is if you did get married in the foreign country, if the spouse doesn't have a visa, they can't come back with you or they can't visit you in the United States. So you're going to have to apply through what's called consular processing. Consular processing is where your immigrant spouse is outside of the United States and you have to file a petition to get them here on what's called an immigrant visa. Once they land in the United States, they become a permanent resident. What kinds of evidence do you show then if you're apart? What kind of evidence can you start to work on? So it's not much different than if your spouse was here, because when you're building a life together, you're still thinking about expenses, financial responsibilities, possibility of a future, family, creating a family. And so you may still purchase property together. You may still have a joint bank account. It may be in the foreign country. You're still going to travel back and forth to constantly keep in touch with your spouse. You can still show that type of evidence to show that you move back and forth. You may still have a joint lease. You may pay for your spouse's residence and both of your names are on the car, then that can be evidence as well. So it's not much different from the evidence if you started to physically live together. It's just the only thing is that when you are living apart in different countries, there's not much emphasis placed on proving that you live together. But also friends and family, you're gonna get to know each other. Your friends and family on both sides are gonna get to know the fact that you're now married. That's important because your friends and family can also play an important role in providing the evidence to show that you have a bona fide marriage. So in a nutshell, 1, make sure you get legal advice. I am here available to talk to you about your situation and to represent you through your process. And then also make sure that you set the tone. When you are married, make sure that you start to document your marriage so that you have a great record of the bona fides, the real aspects of your marriage to show that you do have a true intention to spend your lives together. Once we've determined that you have the evidence that's sufficient, we get to work to put that application together. And the type of application and the kinds of evidence that we include and the types of applications that we include is going to depend on the situation, the circumstances regarding your spouse, your immigrant spouse, and also where your spouse is. So let's start with the adjustment of status process. So with the adjustment of status process, I mentioned it previously with the marriage in Vegas. You say you don't want your immigrant spouse to leave the country and you want them to stay. Number 1, make sure that that is a possibility, but because in some cases, adjustment of status may not be possible. And so before you jump into saying that you're going to do that, or they should stay, they should overstay, or they should change their plans for the future, make sure you get legal advice to understand the immigration consequences involved in this. But with adjustment of status, if you are the spouse of a U.S. citizen, even if you've ended up overstaying, then it may not, you still could qualify for adjustment of status. That's an exception to the rule. Usually, in order to go through adjustment of status, you have to have an immigrant visa number available to you, and you have to prove at the time that you're applying for adjustment of status that you are maintaining legal status. But there is that exception that applies to spouses of U.S. citizens. The same does not apply to legal permanent residents. I'll explain in a minute how that can go. But in this situation where you have to overstay to adjust status, it is possible to do that as long as you're the spouse of a U.S. citizen and as long as you did not misrepresent the reason you are coming into the country while you are at the border. So, for example, your intentions were to come and visit, you met your U.S. citizen spouse, and ended up changing your plans because now you met this spouse and you decided to get married later on. That is acceptable, and I've represented couples successfully who that has happened to. And so just be mindful of that, and that's where it's very important to schedule a consultation to fully understand how your situation is going to be affected if you decide to if you get married and you decide to move forward with your process. Now, say you are the spouse of a legal permanent resident. Can you adjust status? Now, overstaying in this case is probably going to cause more problems than you would like, especially if you still have legal status but it's about to expire. There is no exception that the spouse of a legal permanent resident can stay here even after overstaying. And so in this case where it could be permissible is I'll give you another scenario where it could work. If you're a legal permanent resident and you met someone who's on a student visa, and they were in their first year of 4 years of being on a student visa, and you guys got married. At that point, adjustment of status could be a possibility, because as long as you file it timely, they are maintaining an F1 status. That means that they have about 4 years to be able to adjust status while being in the United States. That gives them the leeway to maintain status up until it's time to apply for the adjustment of status. The other is that while they're here, they could have their petition approved and their immigrant visa number available to them, and that would allow them to adjust status as long as they can maintain their immigration status. So in a case like that, it's possible for the spouse of a legal permanent resident to be here and to stay here and adjust status. Now, adjustment of status comes with this benefit. While you're adjusting status, you're able to get your work permit and travel document should you need it at the same time that you're applying for this benefit. And so you're not necessarily stuck here destitute without the ability to get a head start on your life in the United States. Now, if with the adjustment of status process, what we do is we put a strong application together, and there are going to be different required forms. There's, generally speaking, there's going to be the I-130, the I-485, there's going to be the I-864, there's going to be the I-765, that's the work permit. There's going to be the travel document I-131 forms. And in some cases, if you do have issues in your background that could cause you problems, a waiver. And so that's another consideration here. If you have a U.S. A spouse here, an immigrant spouse, and they themselves have had problems with the law, or they've had past immigration violations, it may still be possible to adjust status and apply for a waiver to get forgiveness for the past violations while applying for adjustment of status. So it's don't let what has happened stop you from getting legal representation through your process, because it is still possible, may be possible to adjust status. It just depends on what is the issue, and then whether you can qualify for the waiver based on the criteria under the waiver. So once we get all of those forms in, you should expect a biometrics notice. That's a background check, and that's standard. And as I said before, the background check shouldn't scare you, because we will address any issues that would come up in a background check. A reminder to be completely honest in the consultation so that I can help you. Because if you're not honest about anything in your background, then I cannot help you effectively. So make sure that you're honest during the consult so we can talk about all these issues and lay it out on the table and find solutions for you. Now, once you've done the background check, the next is you could expect your work permit and travel document. Sometimes if the work permit and travel document are approved at the same time, it comes as a combo card, meaning you can use that same card. It looks like a little driver's license, and it's going to it will come at the bottom with an advanced parole on it, marking at the bottom of it, and that indicates that you can travel on that, and that means travel outside of the US if necessary. If it's not approved at the same time, you'll get 2 different documents to allow you to work and then travel. Then after that, or even before, it just depends on your processing and the service center that's processing your case, you will get an interview notice. The interview notice is going to indicate to you all your instructions, the service center or field office you should attend your interview, the documents you should carry. I also prep my clients for the interview. Be sure to watch my previous video where I talk about preparing for the interview, but I make sure I prepare my clients especially based on their particular circumstances. Once you get to the interview, you're prepared, you're ready. If the officer will tell you then whether they recommend approval or if they need more information. And they'll usually send that request for evidence in the mail, or they'll send an approval or a denial. Hopefully not a denial. And make sure to watch that video on the interviews, because it gives you valuable information about any possible request for evidence and even notices of intent to deny. So follow up on that video. Now, that is adjustment of status process. I can help you. Make sure you call and schedule an appointment. Let's get started on your case and make sure that you are covered by through representation. Don't underestimate this process. Now let's go on to consular processing. That's if your spouse is outside of the United States. What does this process look like? So the process is different in that the evidence may be a little different. As I mentioned before, they don't place too much emphasis on evidence that you live together, because they already understand that you're in two different countries and you have to be here in the United States to petition for your spouse. But they're gonna expect other evidence to show that your relationship, your marriage is real, that you have an intention to spend your lives together. They're gonna look for evidence that you have seen each other in person, that you know each other as friends and families, that you still divide your financial obligations, sometimes showing money transfers, that you keep constant contact through WhatsApp or through other ways of communication. So that kind of information is important, and I work with my clients to get that information together, and it just comes down to what your circumstances are. We file a petition first in the United States. And right now it's taking about a year or a little over a year to get approvals on those petitions. But once we get an approval on the petition, then it moves on to the next step. And that's where it will go to the National Visa Center. The National Visa Center is like the middleman between the petitioner and the embassy in the country of your immigrant spouse. Once they gather all the documentation, there's additional application that has to be completed there. And then there's the affidavit of support. That's the very important document that your application will not be approved without approval of the affidavit of support. The affidavit of support is evidence that you make sufficient income as a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident to support your immigrant spouse while they're in the United States. If you go to the USCIS, you'll be able to look at what income you need to make based on the state you're in and the household size, or the number of dependents you have that make up your household size. Once that all of that is completed to the satisfaction of the National Visa Center, they then move it on to the embassy, and then they schedule the appointment. Now here's the part. The National Visa Center first reviews and then sends you a notice that you're documentarily qualified. That means they have everything, they don't need anything else from you. The only thing left to do is schedule the interview. Once the interviews is not usually scheduled right away, just because there's a backlog right now. So you could still expect a few months to even up to a year to get that interview date. But once you have received the interview date, then you'll want to make sure you prepare for your medical examination. The medical examination is required for both adjustment of status, by the way, so the process we just talked about, as well as consular processing. It's with the medical examination for adjustment of status, it is due at the time that you're filing the application or by the time you do the interview. When you're doing the consular processing, that's where you're at the embassy, then the medical examination is going to be due about 2 weeks before you can do the medical examination and take it with you to the interview. So you're going to go ahead, take all your required documentation. Usually each embassy lists out the documentation that's required for your interview. Make sure, this is what I prep my clients for, I make sure they have all the required documentation for the interview. Once they go to the interview, you're going to have to make sure that you know your spouse, you know what's in your application. This is where I also prep my clients on what to expect and what kinds of questions they need to be able to answer. At that time, the immigration officer is going to review, make sure you qualify. And if you do qualify, they will issue the immigrant visa by taking your passport, processing it. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks to process it and then send it back to you by courier. Now let's take pause to talk about that issue. If your immigrant spouse outside of the United States had an issue with their background, so say they had a conviction or they had a past immigration violation, how will that affect their ability to get the immigrant visa? And once again, at that point, we would have to discuss a waiver. That's why you should schedule a consultation to understand, because when the immigration officer at the embassy is reviewing your case, they are going to determine whether there is something in your background that can render you inadmissible. And it is at that time that they will inform you whether or not you qualify for a waiver. And you want to be prepared for that. So a waiver is going to be what can help you. The downside, though, is that applying for the waiver and then waiting for a decision on the waiver is going to add more time to your case. But where you don't have a choice, this is it still offers hope for you to get to the United States. Now, once the waiver is in process, it will take about a year and a half to be processed, and your case will be held at the embassy until a decision is rendered on the waiver. If it's approved, they'll call you back. They may want an updated medical examination and police record, depending on how long they take to make a decision on your waiver. And then they will go ahead and issue the immigrant visa after all issues have been dealt with and you're now rendered admissible to enter the United States. So those are the processes involved, and I have told you how to get to yes. So the important thing here is evidence at first. Building the evidence to show that your marriage is real. Also addressing any issues that may arise during your process. And then preparing for the final interview. That's going to be just as important as submitting the relevant evidence at the beginning of your process. The application that's initially submitted, and I usually call this preparing the application, it's like a work of art, because you have to be a great storyteller. You have to make clear to the officer why this is a meaningful and bona fide marriage. And you have to understand how to present the evidence in a way that builds the entire picture for the immigration officer. So at this point, it sets the tone for the rest of your process. And then the interview solidifies that. When you get to the interview, you know your spouse, you've spoken with your spouse, you're both on the same page. And I help with each and every step of the process. So give me a call, schedule that consultation, we can get started. Don't forget to like, subscribe, so I can continue to share great information like this with you. Until next time, see you soon. Thank you.